Hello, everybody. Joseph P. Farrell, Thursday, July 7th, 2011. See there, Paulo? I got the date finally. Anyway, this is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium and a couple of announcements and then some commentary on a particular subject that really is beginning to intrigue me. The first announcement is that, as most of you who've been watching the Mike Flanchard show, the updates from my co-author Scott DeHart's son Bennett, we did have our book accepted by a publisher. It will be published by Farrell House, and we're hoping to have that out next year. As soon as I have a manuscript done, when we get his part of what we're writing and my part of what we're writing together and compiled in a manuscript and smoothed out and off to the publisher, I will certainly let everybody know what the title is. As I've mentioned before, this is probably going to be my most controversial book, certainly the most controversial book for Dr. DeHart and certainly by me that either of us has ever written. So anyway, that is the announcement. And what's been bothering me, and I don't know if it's been bothering you, is the story of Dominic Strauss-Kahn. As you know, he was accused of sexual improprieties and rape and so on. And that case in New York was just about ready to fall apart. And then in France, the daughter of a member of his party, the Socialist Party in France, accused him of a similar thing in France. All right. And the story that's emerging is that this was an event that happened 10 years ago, and now her story is that her mother discouraged her from prosecuting at the time. Well, my friends, I think that we have here a clear case that somebody doesn't want Dominic Strauss-Kahn to run for president. And I strongly suspect it has to do with his policies that he had when he was the president of the International Monetary Fund. In other words, this man is a bankster, all right? But if you look at some of his policies, particularly concerning internationalizing labor and his policies towards the bailouts, and incidentally his policies toward the austerity programs now being adopted in Europe, vis-a-vis Greece and some other countries there, I think very clearly that he displeased a certain crowd or a certain faction within the international bankster community, and I have no hesitation of laying the source of that displeasure in London and New York City. But this got me to thinking. Many people ask me a lot about how do we possibly fight, how do we resist, how do we organize, and thus far I haven't gone too much into detail about that topic, because without more preparation in terms of sequels to Babylon's Banksters, what I'm about to say really makes no sense. But let's look back at something I said in Babylon's Banksters. I talk about a discipline that emerged in Babylon's Banksters that began to come about or to arise in the 1970s and 1980s as physicists applied their models of applied mathematics from quantum mechanics to social behavior in organizations. They invented a kind of new application within the mathematics of physics to specifically social behavior and, for that matter, economic systems. And they called it econophysics. Now, this means that the international banking community has access to a theoretical science that, coupled with the application of that science to a vast database of the recurrence of cycles, odd sorts of uncorrelated cycles, could conceivably give them a key into projecting or predicting aggregate social behavior and formulating responses to that behavior before it even arises. And this is why I have always counseled people that the basic source of resistance begins with the individual. It begins with individual enlightenment, with individual consciousness, and with the individual taking responsibility to connect the dots that authors like myself or Dr. DeHart or others are presenting in the field of alternative research and connecting the dots for themselves and reacting and formulating their own responses to them rather than organizing a political opposition, a political party, so on and so forth. And the reason I've counseled that is that when you're dealing with this type of applied mathematics, you are in fact dealing with statistical aggregates. In other words, you cannot predict the behavior of an individual in terms of an individual human being, or within quantum mechanics, the behavior of an individual particle, but you can predict aggregate statistical behavior. So in other words, what I'm advocating is a kind of monkey wrench, consciousness monkey wrench into the whole picture. In other words, to randomize the process as much as possible on the basis of the individual. And the reason I say that, and I want to kind of tip the hat or disclose a bit about some of the approach I'm taking into the sequels to Babylon's Banksters, which incidentally I have begun to research and have done a little bit of writing about. The interesting thing to note, and you can check this out online, you can Google the name Maurice Strong, M-A-U-R-I-C-E-S-T-R-O-N-G, a very famous wealthy Canadian who moves in the international banking community. If you look at him, you will discover that he's heavily involved in promoting a kind of bankster version of the ancient Philosophia Perennis, or as it was known in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, the Prisca Theologia, the ancient theology. He is involved in promoting in effect, what they want to be a new religion, which is in fact a very old religion, but it's been twisted to suit the bankers' purposes. So in other words, what I'm suggesting to you is that fact alone indicates that they've anticipated certain things in their models and their social projections, and they are beginning to put into place the long-term organizations, the long-term cultural means that they want to see come about. So this is why I've been stressing this idea of personal spirituality, responsibility, and advocating that people get their heads out of thinking ethically in terms of a particular system or particular book, because that's not going to work with what they have planned. They have models that are very sophisticated that they can now predict aggregate behavior. So let's go back to Dominic Strauss-Kahn. I think what you had there, and this is why I brought him up in this context, I think what you had there was a man who made it to the top of that particular circle of power, who not only made it to the top, but did so and maintained his rather different views about where the international banking community should be moving. In other words, he was something that the banksters dread. He was a man in a position of power and influence who did not share their general outlook, who did not share their general views. In other words, he was the statistical anomaly. And nothing frightens them more than that. And I have a sneaking suspicion that we're going to be seeing more and more cases like that. You're going to find them popping up more and more, and you're going to find the responses to them becoming more and more frantic. We're living almost in the same kind of situation that, if you've ever read Isaac Asimov's Foundation trilogy, Richard Hoagland suggested these to me, and in fact I had read them as a kid in junior high school. I'm rereading them now. But we're dealing with that whole conflict, hidden conflict of elites that Asimov outlines in that science fiction series so very, very well. And he talks in those series specifically about the idea of a mathematical model that is based on a higher dimensional geometry of a social behavior, a statistical way of predicting aggregate human behavior and then responding to it ahead of time. So it's very powerful ideas. We're watching these ideas play out in front of us, and I don't think the story of Dominic Strauss-Kahn is over by any means. So everybody keep your eye on it, and this is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium for Thursday, July 7th, 2011. See you on the flip side, everybody.